Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week we will be continuing our reading and discussion of the Rolf W. Giebel translation of the Vajrasekhara Sutra. Remember that this title can be roughly translated as the Adamantine Pinnacle Sutra. Vajra means thunderbolt, but it can also refer to the quality of being diamond-like, like adamantine, and Sekhara means realization, achievement, or to summit, hence the pinnacle. This title actually refers to several texts, and the one that we'll be using is the one that is most influential in Chinese and Japanese Shingon Buddhism. Part 1 of Fascicle 3 contains sections on initiation rites and secret knowledges of esoteric Buddhism. Here, more of the critically important and some of the most closely preserved rituals of esoteric Buddhism are described and explained. We hope you enjoy. Extended Rules for the Great Mandala. 4. Initiation of the Disciple. Next, I shall explain in detail the rules for introducing an adamantine disciple into the Great Mandala of the adamantine realm. Among these rules, I shall first explain the introduction into the mandala, which is for the sake of the supreme siddhi of the salvation, benefit, and well-being of all realms of sentient beings without exception. When introducing the disciple into this great mandala, one should not choose between worthy vessels and unworthy vessels. Why is this? There are, world-honored ones, sentient beings who commit great sins. If they enter the great mandala of the adamantine realm, after having seen and entered it, they will be freed from all evil destinies. Then again, there are, world-honored ones, sentient beings who cling to all kinds of profit, food and drink, and lustful desires, who loathe the samaya, and are incapable of performing the preliminary practices, and so forth. But even such beings will, if they enter this mandala in accordance with their mental inclinations, attain the fulfillment of all their wishes. Then again, there are, world-honored ones, sentient beings who delight in singing, dancing, fun, games, food and drink, and amusements, and who, because they do not clearly understand the dharma nature of the realization of the great vehicle of all the Tathagatas, enter the mandalas of other families of deities, fearing the prohibitory precepts. They do not enter the mandalas of the family of all the Tathagatas, which encompass the fulfillment of all wishes and are able to produce unsurpassed pleasure and joy. Accordingly, these who face the path of entry to the altars, mandalas, of evil destinies, should enter this great mandala of the adamantine realm in order to experience all delight, supreme siddhi, well-being and happiness, and to transmute the path whereby all evil destinies appear. Then again, there are, world-honored ones, sentient beings abiding in the true Dharma, who, because they have for the sake of all beings been seeking the Buddha's enlightenment by expedient means for the supreme siddhi of the morality, meditation, and wisdom of all the Tathagatas, have been long cultivating the 4 concentrations, 8 liberations, 10 stages, and so forth, and have become weary of their exertions. If they enter this great mandala of the adamantine realm, as soon as they have entered, the fruit of the state of all the Tathagatas will be not at all difficult for them to attain, let alone other kinds of siddhi. Next, the disciple should first of all make obeisance to all the Tathagatas by means of the 4 obeisances. First, he makes obeisance to the eastern quarter with the whole body, stretching out his arms in the adamantine clasp, Vajranjali, with the palms pressed together and the fingers interlaced, and touching the ground with his chest. The mantra is Om Sarvatathagata Pujo Pastanayat Manam Niryatayami Sarvatathagata Vajrasattva Datistashvamam. Om, I offer myself for service and worship of all the Tathagatas. O Vajrasattva of all the Tathagatas, empower me. Then, placing the foregoing adamantine clasp level with his heart, he makes obeisance to the southern quarter, touching the ground with his forehead. The mantra is Om Sarvatathagata Pujabhiseka Yatmanam Niryatayami Sarvatathagata Vajraratna Abhisincha Mam. Om, I offer myself for consecration through worship of all the Tathagatas. O Vajraratna of all the Tathagatas, consecrate me. Then, placing the foregoing adamantine clasp on his head, he makes obeisance to the western quarter, touching the ground with his mouth. The mantra is Om Sarvatathagata Puja Pravartana Yatmanam Niryatayami Sarvatathagata Vajradharma Pravartayamam. Om, I offer myself for the incitement of worship of all the Tathagatas. O Vajradharma of all the Tathagatas, incite me. Then, bringing the foregoing adamantine clasp to his heart, he makes obeisance to the northern quarter, touching the ground with the crown of his head. The mantra is Om Sarvatathagata Puja Karmane Atmanam Niryatayami Sarvatathagata Vajra Karma Kurumam. Om, I offer myself for the act of worship of all the Tathagatas. O Vajra Karma of all the Tathagatas, activate me. Then, with the disciple wearing a garment of red silken fabric and his face covered with a red cloth, the teacher makes the disciple bind the Sattva Vajra seal with this mantra, Samayastvam, you are the pledge. Then, he makes him hold a garland of flowers with his 2 middle fingers and introduces him into the mandala with this heart mantra, Samaya Hum, pledge Hum. Having introduced him, the teacher makes the following pronouncement. Adyat Tvam Sarvatathagata Kula Pravishta. Tad Aham Te Vajra Janam Utpada Yisyami Yena Janena Tvam. Sarvatathagata Siddhim Api Prapsyasi Kim Utanya Siddhi. Naka Dvaya Dirshta Mahamandalasya Vaktavyam Ma Te Samayo Vyathet. Today, you are entering the family of all the Tathagatas. I shall generate in you that adamantine knowledge by means of which you will obtain even the accomplishment of all the Tathagatas, not to mention other accomplishments as well. Nor should you speak of this to anybody who has not seen the great mandala, lest the pledge become naught for you. Then the adamantine acharya, teacher, should himself bind the Sattva Vajra seal, which he places facing downward on the disciple's head, making the following pronouncement. This is the Samaya Vajra, pledge Vajra. It will split your head if you talk about this to others, so you must not speak of it. Having empowered the oath water once, the teacher makes the disciple drink it. The oath water mantra is Vajrasattva Svayam Teja Hirdaye Samavashtita Nirbijya Taksanam Yayad Yadi Bruyad Idam Nayam Vajrodakata. Vajrasattva has now settled in your heart. If you should divulge this procedure, he will at that very moment burst your heart asunder and depart. Adamantine water, Da. Then the teacher addresses the disciple, saying, Henceforth you will look upon me as Vajrapani. You must do as I say, and you must not treat me with contempt. Do not bring calamity upon yourself such that you die and then fall into hell. After having spoken thus, the teacher says to the disciple, Say these words. I beseech all the Tathagatas to empower me. I beseech Vajrasattva to enter upon me. Then the adamantine acharya should bind the Sattva Vajra seal and make this pronouncement. Ayam tat samayo vajram vajrasattvam iti smirtam aveshayatu te jaiva vajrajanam anutaram vajravesha ah. This is the pledge, the Vajra known as Vajrasattva. May it cause unsurpassed adamantine knowledge to enter upon you this very day. Adamantine entry. Ah. Then the teacher binds the wrath fist, Kroda Mushti, breaking the Sattva Vajra seal, and makes the disciple recite at will the 100-syllable mantra of the realization of the great vehicle, with adamantine speech. Then the Avesha, entry of Vajrasattva, takes place, and as soon as the Avesha has taken place, he generates subtle knowledge. Through this knowledge, he knows the minds of others, comprehends the minds of others, and knows the 3 ages with respect to all matters. His mind becomes firm in the teaching of all the Tathagatas. He totally eliminates all suffering, is freed from all evil destinies, and is invulnerable among all sentient beings. All the Tathagatas empower him. All siddhis manifest before him, and he obtains the birth of unprecedented joy, well-being, and happiness. Because of this well-being and so forth, he may accomplish either samadhi or the dharani gates, or all his wishes may be completely fulfilled, or he may even accomplish the quintessence of all the Tathagatas. Then the teacher binds the Sattva Vajra seal and, releasing it on the disciple's heart, he recites this heart mantra. Tishtha Vajra, Dirdo me bhava, Sasvatol me bhava, Hirdayam me ditishta, Sarvasiddhim ka mi prayacha, Hom ha 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 ho. Abide, O Vajra, be firm for me, be eternal for me, empower my heart and grant me all success. Hom ha 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 ho. Then the teacher makes the disciple throw the garland of flowers onto the great mandala with this heart mantra. Prativicha Vajra ho. Receive, O Vajra, ho. Wherever the garland of flowers should happen to fall, that deity is effective for him. Then the teacher takes the garland of flowers and fastens it on the disciple's head with this heart mantra. Om Pratigrirna Tavam Imam Sattvan Mahabala. Om, accept this being, O you of great power. With this, the great Sattva accepts the disciple, and he quickly gains success. After entry has been accomplished, the teacher uncovers the disciple's face with this heart mantra. Om Vajrasattva Svayam Tejya Kaksudgata Natat Para Udgatayati Sarvakso Vajrakaksur Anutaram. Om Vajrasattva himself is intent upon opening your eyes today. The all-eyed one opens the unsurpassed adamantine eye. Then the teacher recites the vision mantra, He Vajrapashya. Hey Vajra, look. Then he makes the disciple look at the great mandala in regular order. As soon as he has seen it, the disciple is empowered and protected by all the Tathagatas, and Vajrasattva abides in the disciple's heart, whereupon he sees the play of supernatural powers, such as various shining figures. As a result of having seen the mandala, he will, through the Tathagata's empowerment, either see the Lord, the great Vajradhara, manifesting his original form, or he will see a Tathagata. Henceforth, he will achieve all objectives, all things that his mind desires, and all siddhis, up to attaining the state of Vajradhara or a Tathagata. After having shown the disciple the great mandala, the teacher empowers a flask of scented water with a vajra and anoints the disciple's head with this heart mantra, Vajra Bisincha. O Vajra, consecrate him. Then, with a particular seal and fastening a garland to the disciple, he places his own insignia in the palms of the disciple's two hands, reciting this heart mantra. Ajabisiktas tvam asi buddhair vajrabisekata idam te sarva buddhatvam girna vajram susidaye. Om vajradipaditvam abisinchami tishtha vajra samayastvam. You have now been consecrated by the Buddhas with the adamantine consecration. Take for good success this vajra, which represents for you complete Buddhahood. Om, I consecrate you as adamantine Lord. Abide, Vajra. You are the pledge. Then the teacher consecrates the disciple with an adamantine name with his heart mantra. Om Vajrasattva Tvam Abhisanchami Vajranama Abhisekata He Vajranama. Om, O Vajrasattva, I consecrate you with the consecration of the adamantine name. Hey, adamantine name, adamantine so-and-so. When the teacher confers a name on the disciple, he should add he and use this when calling him. Here ends the detailed explanation of the rules for entry into all mandalas. 5. Knowledge for achieving success, Siddhi. 4 varieties of Siddhi knowledge. Then the teacher should question the disciple, saying, do you prefer the knowledge of the Siddhi of generation of material objectives, the knowledge of the Siddhi of supernatural powers, the knowledge of the Siddhi of the Vidyadhara, or the knowledge of the supreme Siddhi of the knowledge of all the Tathagatas? He should explain that which accords with his disciple's wishes. Thereupon the teacher teaches the disciple the seal knowledge, mudra jhana, for achieving the Siddhi of material objectives. One should visualize in one's heart the form of a vajra resting on treasure. Having visualized this, one will then see hidden treasure lying in the ground. Having visualized the form of a vajra, one visualizes it in the sky. Wherever one should see it fall, that is the site of hidden treasure. The form of a vajra on the tongue, this the wise person should visualize. If he himself says it is here after he has spoken, his words will come true. One should visualize one's own body as being completely in the form of a vajra. Wherever he who has been entered upon by the vajra falls, that is the site of hidden treasure. The heart mantras for these are Vajranidhi, adamantine treasure, Ratnanidhi, gem treasure, Dharmanidhi, dharma treasure, Karmanidhi, action treasure. Next, the teacher should teach the disciple the seal knowledge for achieving the Siddhi of adamantine supernatural powers. The entry of the vajra having been effected, water assumes the form of a vajra. Through this visualization, one quickly succeeds in walking about on water. Having again effected the entry of the vajra, one's physical form assumes one's desired figure. Repeatedly practicing in this manner, one spontaneously assumes the figure of even a Buddha. The vajra, having entered upon oneself, one visualizes oneself as being like the sky. After having repeatedly practiced as one pleases, one will then obtain antarja, invisibility. If, when the Vajra has entered upon oneself, one visualize oneself as being like a Vajra, then to the extent that one jumps up in the air, one will obtain the ability to move through empty space. The mantras for these are Vajrajala, adamantine water, Vajrarupa, adamantine form, Vajrakasha, adamantine space, Vajram Aham, I am a Vajra. Next, the teacher teaches the disciple the seal knowledge for achieving the siddhi of the adamantine Vidyadhara. One should visualize the figure of the moon, and one will soar up into empty space. Grasping a Vajra in one's hand, one will obtain the state of an adamantine Vidyadhara. Ascending up onto a lunar disk, one should visualize an adamantine gem. He of pure body will succeed in soaring up into the sky as he wishes in a moment. After having ascended up onto a lunar disk, one visualizes an adamantine lotus held in the hand. One should visualize Vajranetra, whereupon one will attain the stage of a Vidyadhara. Abiding in the middle of a lunar disk, one should visualize a Karma Vajra. By quickly obtaining adamantine skill, Vajravishva, Karma Vajra, one will then attain the state of the All Vidyadhara. The heart mantras for these are Vajradhara, Vajra holder, Ratnadhara, gem holder, Padmadhara, lotus holder, Karmadhara, action holder. Next, the teacher teaches the disciple the seal knowledge for achieving the supreme siddhi of all the Tathagatas. Abiding in the meditation of all Vajra, Sarva Vajra, Karma Vajra, one contemplates in the realm of empty space. He of adamantine body will succeed in soaring up into the sky as he pleases in a moment. Abiding in the mental equipoise of all purity, one repeatedly practices what is supreme. He in whom knowledge is accomplished quickly obtains the 5 supernatural faculties. If one visualizes Vajrasattva throughout all space, then when one's thought has become firm, one will quickly become Vajradhara. If one visualizes everything as composed of the Buddha's form in empty space, then through the mental equipoise of all Buddhas, one will attain the accomplishment of perfect enlightenment. The mantras for these are Vajra Vajra, Suddha Suddha, pure pure, Sattva Sattva, being being, Buddha Buddha. This above represents the achievement of the knowledge of all the siddhis. Secret practices. Next, the teacher should make the disciple observe the practice for competence in secrets. First of all, he should recite the oath heart mantra. Om Vajrasattva Svayam Tejya Hridaye Samavastita Nirbija Taksanam Yayad Yadi Bruyad Idam Nayam. Then the teacher addresses the disciple with the following words. You must not transgress this oath heart mantra. Do not bring calamity upon yourself such that you die prematurely and fall into hell with this body. Then the teacher should teach him the secret seal knowledge. Having effected the entry of the Vajra, one clasps his hands while in mental equipoise, with the palms in the adamantine clasp, and softly, even mountain stones will show respect. This is the seal of the adamantine clap, Vajratala. The rite of entry of the Vajra completed, one strikes with the palms in adamantine bind. By means of the method of softly clapping the hands, even mountain stones will enter upon one. By means of the above rite of entry, and with the fingers of the adamantine bind stretched out, the forefingers should be burst open in unison, whereupon one will destroy the 100 families in a moment. With all the fingers placed together in a rite of subtle entry, the adamantine bind is released, whereupon one is able to remove and overcome all suffering. Next, the teacher should explain the secret accomplishment. One enters via the bhaga, orifice, the body of either a woman or a man. Having entered, one mentally pervades that whole body. The heart mantras for this are Vajravasha, adamantine control, Vajravisha, adamantine entry, Vajrahana, adamantine destruction, Vajrahara, adamantine elimination. Thus concludes Part 1 of Fascicle 3 of the Vajrasekhara Sutra. So that was Vajrasekhara Sutra, Fascicle 3, Part 1. Docs, any questions?
A few, and one of them is more important than the rest, so let's get this out of there to start with. Are we welcome to this knowledge? There's a lot in this part of the sutra that's talking about things being secret, and the stakes are mistakes lead to hell. So, I'm not sure that it is ethically okay to be reading it at this point. This is a initiatory practice, and I'm getting to the point where it's like, I don't know that this is something that people outside of that practice should be reading.
That's a really good point, and I'm glad that you bring it up, because that's something that I really wanted to talk about, especially as we got through this third fascicle, because that's where a lot of this stuff really comes out in strength about it being closed and secret. So just for context, I think that what I'll do is, for the listeners, I'll present sort of both sides of the debate as to whether it's okay that, we have this stuff available to us. And from there, we can sort of begin to give our own personal opinions, and we can start to explain our positions a little bit with regards to the availability and the ethical aspect of this. So the first side of the debate that I want to mention is the side that says, no, we're not allowed to be reading this. And so that side of the debate argues that, yes, this stuff is secret, and it will send you to hell if you reveal the secret, and if you make mistakes, and if you misunderstand it. I've often heard the esoteric Buddhist teachings as being like a rocket ship. And depending on how you get involved with it, correctly or incorrectly, if you do it correctly, it's a rocket ship to Buddhahood, and it will make you be a Buddha in this very lifetime. And if you go about it incorrectly, then it's a rocket ship to hell, and it will cause calamity and suffering and so on and so forth. So when it comes to how to understand esoteric Buddhism in the context of that sort of position, we need to look at it and understand that it is indeed initiatory, and in some ways it is closed. But we have to be careful and specific whenever we say that something is closed like that, because oftentimes other closed traditions, other traditions for which you can't just freely read everything and participate, depending on who or where you are, they are often closed due to ethnic or cultural reasons. And it's important to remember that this is closed for religious reasons. Whenever something is closed for ethnic or cultural reasons, then elbowing your way in there and reading and participating and practicing without permission is not just a violation of the tradition, it's a violation of the people and the culture. It's a violation of the identity of the practitioners. And it's wrong to elbow your way in and to take that from them because that is theirs, it doesn't belong to you. And especially Westerners and Europeans and, people from these backgrounds which historically have a history with colonizing folks, this sort of theft is something that the people who are victims of it are tired of. And they say you should not, cannot do. And it's absolutely valid to let them have those things and to not steal your way in and take what's theirs, take what's not yours, and violate this identity issue.
I would say that in particular, Westerners taking on Native American figures is a big problem here. I write fantasy stories. I like gathering folklore, and there are specific pieces of the Native American folklore that get brought up by white people a lot that white people are not supposed to be talking about. It's something that in my writing I have learned to be more mindful of. In my case, it was watching someone else make the mistake and learned from that, but it was a mistake that I would have easily made myself at the time. There are certain parts of folklore that especially white folks shouldn't have. We're not welcome to it.
That's exactly right. And it's something that's widespread, right? This Native American example is an example of something that has already been pillaged and should not be misused now that it's been pillaged. And the existence of these closed traditions in a post-colonial world is sort of due to the fact that already closed traditions had already been pillaged, And now there's people who are trying to preserve it and keep it and maintain the identity so that it doesn't get pillaged by whites. And it's not just Native Americans. It's not just people who are subject to colonialism in general. Another example of a closed initiatory tradition is actually Shintoism. Shintoism is obviously something that we are all allowed to read about and study about, but the idea is that there is no practice of Shinto that exists outside of the purview of ethnically Japanese people. Now, there's a lot of academic, archaeological reasons why we can say that that's not quite right. There's no such thing as a singular Japanese ethnicity. Japanese ethnicity is a construction based off of these waves of immigration over history from Korea and China, etc. There's all kinds of problems with it there. But the idea is that from a simple doctrinal perspective, Shinto is basically like a religion of a specific group of people, and that's people who have heritage relating to the Japanese archipelago. That's how it claims itself to be. That's how it presents itself to be. And we can cause problems and investigate that and challenge that academically all we want, but the fact remains that if a white person were to start making shrines with torii gates and start chanting and ringing bells to try and invoke spirits of the land, whatever happens will not be Shinto. And the reason why is because the kami all live in Japan. And the kami have a relationship with the Japanese people. They don't live in America, and they don't have a relationship with American people. And that's been sort of a problem with Shinto as Japanese populations have migrated outside of the Japanese archipelago. For example, there's a huge population of Japanese people in Hawaii and on the west coast of the United States for whom Shinto is still sort of a sticky, hazy point. Whenever they go and they pray at a shrine that's been erected in these places, it's still kind of regarded as being less than doing so on the main archipelago of Japan. And so it's kind of complicated, right? And this is an example of, something that's connected to ethnicity and to identity. Now, it's important to remember that in this position, which says that it's unethical for us to be reading and discussing this information from esoteric Buddhism, the reasons are not ethnic and cultural. The reasons are religious in nature. So it's not a violation of Tibetan people or of South Asian people or of East Asian people necessarily to be reading this. It's more of a violation of a self-proclaimed religious doctrine. And this is something that comes up quite a lot in other esoteric traditions as well. In esoteric versions of Sufism and esoteric versions of Christianity and all of these other sort of esoteric traditions that come up, the idea is like this information is dangerous. And it's dangerous not because it hurts somebody else for you to have it, but because it hurts you to have it if you misuse it, if you misunderstand it. So that's sort of what's happening here. This is something that's dangerous for us to misuse or to misunderstand.
And I would propose, perhaps based on that framing, that a white person who has been initiated would be welcome to this. It's not a matter of ethnicity, it's a matter of initiation.
Exactly, yeah. I myself know 2 white American monks who have been initiated correctly, and they have, I would think, a lot of the information that's presented in this sutra given to them in the right way, in the sort of traditional or the orthodox way, as opposed to reading it outside of that context. Now, the other position, which says that it is okay for us to have this information, that position argues that it's okay for all of us to see this stuff, all of us to discuss this stuff, all of us to read this stuff. And there are a couple of reasons why they say this. One reason why is that translating something like this into English and posting it online, where I got it, is something that many people think falls under the purview of quote-unquote spreading the Dharma. The organization that hosts the Rolf W. Giebel translation of the Vajrasekhara Sutra, which we are reading, is called Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai, which translates to the Association for the Propagation of Buddhism. So this is sort of falling under the realm of spreading the Dharma. And even if it's something that's secret, closed, initiatory, what have you, it's still sort of thought of as being a positive thing according to certain interpretations. Another reason why it's sort of thought of as being okay is because these translations are sought after for academic purposes. That is probably the weakest point in this position, because plenty of white academics from, post-colonial states, they want to go in and they just want to study these closed practices. They just want to study these initiatory cultural and ethnic identity-related religions. But academia historically, especially during the colonial era, was just another arm of empire. It was just another arm of colonialism. It supported colonialism and it benefited from the fruits of colonialism, and it wouldn't exist in the state that we have it today if not for colonialism. So I don't know if I think this point is very strong, but it still is a point nonetheless. This sort of self-proclaimed academic free information position. All information should be freely available to everyone all the time. That's sort of the self-proclaimed position of academia in a lot of ways, at least now, is that there should be nothing that is hidden from view, except in these cases where something is related to ethnic identity. When something is secret and personal to a group of people, other stuff should be just freely available and accessible. Finally, the third point is much of this information has been spread around publicly by various esoteric Buddhist thinkers in East Asia for centuries. So it's not that people have gone around telling all the secrets on purpose. Not necessarily. It's just that keeping a secret is very hard. Protecting a tradition like this is very hard. And the rituals that are described in here are meant to be semi-public. You're supposed to be able to see them happening, even if you don't have the enlightened eye and you don't see sort of the magic of what's going on. I even hesitate to say magic because it's not magic. It's just stuff that we're not supposedly enlightened enough to be able to understand or be able to see ourselves. So the amount of revealed information about these secret Buddhist teachings across all of time, it only ever goes up. It never goes down, because you can't put the cat back in the bag. Once the information is revealed, it's revealed, and it spreads. And that's okay, at least in some form, because these things are supposed to be seen. They're supposed to be participated in, at least in some small way, by sort of the public, the religious public, the lay people. So thinkers like Kukai and Huiguo and others all across esoteric Buddhism's history, they have sort of inadvertently or sometimes intentionally revealed and democratized a lot of this information to the laity. For example, one does not necessarily have to read about the information about throwing a flower onto the mandala and realizing your secret connection with whoever it lands on in order to see that that's an important ritual. That ritual is public and you can look it up on YouTube. It's just a matter of, like, if you watch it on YouTube, do you understand what the nature of that secret relationship is? Do you understand who all is there and what they're all doing? Do you understand what's going on? No, you don't. But it's carried out in Japanese. And if you spoke Japanese, you'd have at least some amount of understanding and some amount of participation and emotional investment in the ritual and in the progression of the events that are happening in front of you. And so it's not like it's closely guarded in that respect. It's just that the why behind it is closely guarded in some contexts, but other contexts, it's completely revealed. And so it's interesting. So that's sort of the position of people who say that it's okay that we have this. It's okay that this is spread around. It's okay that we're reading and discussing this. As for my own position, I think that if you believe in esoteric Buddhism, and that's your religion, that's your upbringing, or that's your practice, or that's your understanding of the world, if that's something that's important to you personally and to your identity, then absolutely it's not okay for you to go around and spread all this stuff. It's not okay for you to look at this stuff and say that everybody should know it all the time. But it's not that for me, and it's not that for many other scholars around, and it's not... I guess what I'm saying is you can't impose your own self-proclaimed rules about this information onto other people when it's freely available. And if you do so, then that's verging on imposing your own religious identity on somebody else. One way or the other, this is out here. And whether or not it's ethical for us to be reading it and discussing about it, it's hosted free, by the way, on one of the largest, most popular repositories of English language translations of the sutras in the world, the Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai, BDK America. And so it's there, and academics study it and talk about it and use it in their work. And so I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to violate anybody's personal rules, but I'm also not going to let anybody else set their personal rules as mine, if that makes sense.
I understand it, but also that's not where I come to from this. And I think if you were to, again, I used the example of Native American folklore before. If you point that reasoning in that direction, that reasoning falls apart. And in that way, I'm not sure where I fall on that part of the argument, but I will say from my end, the fact that these rituals are done publicly and that ultimately what this is a description of that ritual, there's nothing to protect there that isn't already being protected by the fact that I don't know the other half of this, that I'm not initiated. So in this particular case, right, if this was a ritual that was done behind closed doors and was something that was meant to be very private like that, I would say that we are committing a pretty drastic ethical violation right now. But because it is publicly done and it is not something that's in practice hidden from the public, I think it's okay because I can get this information potentially by watching the ritual done. Watching the ritual is not going to give me the information that's missing here isn't already missing from the sutra. Like, I'm not initiated, so I don't know the secret parts. So I think that's fine, but it's also tripping close enough to that line that I was feeling genuinely uncomfortable reading this one.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. And you bring up something important, which is that it says, keep this secret, sometimes even at cost of your life, keep this secret no matter what, but it doesn't actually tell you the secret, which is good. It doesn't reveal the esoteric aspect of it. And that speaks to a doctrinal point as to why I think that it's pretty okay for us to read this, which is that the secret stuff, the esoteric stuff, is by definition esoteric and secret because it relies on a relationship between a teacher and a student. And that relationship involves this mind-to-mind transmission of the Dharma that we've talked about before. So there is a foundation of initiation and of education and of ritual practice and of these special rituals like this. But there's also a foundation of something happening that's beyond our conventional five senses and takes place in our Buddhist sixth sense, which is mind. And in that sort of realm, in that sort of space, the teacher is allegedly transmitting the secret stuff, a lot of the secret stuff, to the student over time by that means, with support from these rituals. And so we don't see that. We can't see that. We're not initiated. And it's also not ever going to be written about, really. There might be some surrounding information, but the secret itself is not, at least in this sutra, revealed directly. Now, the other aspect of this, too, that's doctrinal, is that this can be a rocket ship to hell or a rocket ship to Buddhahood, but the sort of foundation for that is founded on the doctrine of Buddha nature. The secret is kind of like kept a secret and it's told as a secret and everyone, thinks of it as a secret, but the secret that they are protecting, at least according to Shingon monks that I have spoken to, I haven't asked them directly what is the secret, but the secret that they have revealed about it all is the interpretation of all of reality that I've talked about before as being the body of Dainichi, of Mahavajrachana, and everything in reality being possessed of Buddha nature and being sort of a word in his whole sutra, his whole dharma that he's preaching to himself, by himself, for his own enjoyment over time. So the secret part is something that we've already sort of talked about and sort of established, and is something that also these other thinkers that I've mentioned, like Hukai and Hui Guo, have revealed in their own ways. There might be some esoteric understanding of it or some esoteric way of transmitting that information, or some esoteric way of gaining the supernatural powers and gaining the ability to summon Buddhas and the ability to see Buddhas and stuff, that might be something esoteric that you can only get from this sort of relationship you have with your teacher and your student. But the information itself is purely that everybody already is a Buddha. Everybody already has Buddha nature. And everybody is already a part of the mandala, and everybody is already a part of Dainichi, of Mahavajrachana. And sort of this world that we live in presents itself as having suffering, having this evil that exists, having delusion and ignorance, but the true actual reality of it is just not that way. So it's almost like they're taking something that we've already seen in different Buddhist traditions and something we've already read about in different sutras and something that we've already discussed on the show, and they're saying this is a protected secret. But really it's just a doctrine. Really it's just sort of an assertion about how the world works and how the world is. And even if you believe those things, even if you believe that doctrinal point, even then, none of this is really secret, so to speak. The secret aspect of it is that it's being presented skillfully. So I've used this rocket ship analogy, but another analogy for how to understand the secretness of all of this is not to look at it as keeping secret because you want to hide or preserve something. You want to protect your identity or your religious practice or something about yourself. The idea is actually keeping it secret the same way that you would keep differential equations secret from a 5-year-old, because a 5-year-old would not know what to do with differential equations. It would just scare them away from math altogether. It would completely confound them. It would upset them. It would be horrible if we tried to expose a 5-year-old to differential equations as their first form of math. So we keep that behind. We keep that aside. We know about it, but we don't share it with them yet. We initiate them with the 4 regular operations: addition, subtraction, division, multiplication. And we build on top of that with algebra and geometry and so on. And then eventually, after we've built up that foundation of knowledge, that foundation of how things work, without sort of bouncing them off of the whole entire topic along the way, then it's okay to reveal differential equations and linear algebra and all of that higher level stuff that would scare any reasonable person away if they were exposed to that as their first math, if that makes sense. So it's more of like a system of progressive education rather than a system where things are being protected and held like a dragon's hoard of information.
That makes sense. And anytime I'm looking at something from outside of my culture and it's like, this needs to be secret, this needs to be secret, that should be cause for questioning oneself.
Absolutely.
That's supposed to be there, but in this case, we're only getting half of the equation anyway, so I do still have concerns. Like, I've been thumping around in esoteric spaces outside of Buddhism for a while now, and I have seen plenty of people who have believed much stranger things in an attempt to gain supernatural powers. So I'm looking at this sutra going, there's multiple people in my past who I really hope don't get a hold of this because they are going to use it incorrectly.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. It's something that it also has to do with like the motives, like, are we reading this and studying this and discussing it so that we can sort of get to the gold in the dragon's hoard, or can we get to the supernatural powers and the ability to fly around and the ability to read minds and stuff? That's not why we're in it. That's not why we're looking at it. And even if we do have it for that reason, just reading this stuff will not give us the ability to fly around and read minds. And so that's sort of another point as to the question of like religious affiliation. If it is your religion and stuff, then you are more than welcome to not share this stuff. But if it's not your religion, it's out there for you to look at if you're interested, and just be nice and kind and careful with it, just like you would be with anyone else's religious stuff. We try very hard not to take other religions through the mud on this show. And of course, in that same fashion, best not to drag this through the mud either.
I mean, we've dragged a couple of specific aspects of specific religions into the mud, but I think That's because those specific aspects are causing problems. This is not causing a problem.
Exactly.
Directly, anyway. There are definitely people who I know of who would misuse this because they want to be able to fly.
Right.
But they're going to find that source of proposed esoteric knowledge somewhere. And as far as such sources go, this is not the worst I've seen, you know? Like, at one point, I read going through esoteric texts from outside of Buddhism, came across one that was like, hey, this book is cursed. If you misuse this knowledge, you are damned. And it's like, I kept reading it. I did read that, but I hope you'll understand that I'm also not going to tempt fate by talking about it a whole lot. In part because it's, bad form, and also because the people who wrote that book don't want it being talked about. So, but that's a different factor. That book specifically says, hey, do not spread this information. This text has portions where it's saying don't spread this information, but like we've said before, the actual information that is trying to be protected is not written down here.
I'm glad you bring up the issue of this good form thing as a reason why not to spread stuff around, because I think that this text itself doesn't necessarily contain the secrets themselves, but it does sort of give you a manual for how to practice in good form if you are one of these practitioners. So what I mean is, it doesn't say, here's the secret, and then it's up to you whether to share it around or spread it around. It says, if you know the secret, don't share it. Don't talk about it. Don't spread it around. And I think that that's an important aspect of it, is that this is prescribing the ritual for how to become initiated and how to enter into the community of all the Tathagatas and whatnot. But beyond that, it's just telling you, like, here's how you should act when this happens. It doesn't say something in it that would be problematic for us to necessarily talk about, at least just to point at it being there, if that makes sense.
Anything else we want to talk about on that topic?
No, I think we're good on that topic.
All right. So now that we've spent 30 minutes on that, let's talk about some of the contents of the actual sutra. So at one point, the translation gives us adamantine so-and-so as one of the chants. What?
Yeah, so this is an interesting part of the text. This is part of that change that I mentioned whenever we were talking about Fascicle 2, Part 2. We've shifted into this part of the text, this mode of the text, where we've stopped talking about doctrine and we've started talking about ritual and how to do it. And so this part of the sutra is often looked to as a ritual manual. And ritual manuals are very, very different from conventional sermons. And this is sort of something that comes up a couple of times in this text. Another time where it'll come up is at the very end, where you have this ritualized dialogue with the person who's being initiated, and you ask them, which of the 4 cities do you want to have knowledge about? And then it lists them all 4 out so that the practitioner can refer to that to read out the mantras and read out the ritual forms that they must take in order to give out the information about that particular city that the practitioner wants to have, that they say they want to know about. You get all 4, but if you are actually in the ritual, you'd only get 1. This is another case right here. It's kept blank so that the teacher who initiates the student can say their adamantine name whenever they get it. So when you're initiated, you get a monastic name, and you also get a secret name, an adamantine name. And so the monastic name is different from your birth name, right? And that's what everybody who goes to the temple will call you, and that's what your teacher will call you, and what you'll call yourself in regular day-to-day life. There's tons of them, and they usually involve these Buddhist characters that we've seen before. For example, the use of the character A, as in Amida, which is the same, by the way, as the root syllable A. That is something that you'll see very frequently in these monastic names. Another one that I've seen is Kaku, which is the Japanese reading of the character for to awaken or to remember. And it's usually one of these terms that we use when referring to enlightenment. So Hongaku in Japanese uses the same kaku as that. And Hongaku, as you remember, means original enlightenment. So enlightenment is one. Another one that you'll often see is Kai, as in Kukai. Kai is the reading for the character for ocean, and it refers to the ocean of emptiness, the ocean of birth and death, the ocean across which we must tread to get to the farther shore of enlightenment. And so this is something you'll frequently see in their names as well. However, their adamantine name is only used in that initiatory ritual, and it's only known between the teacher and the student. Nobody else knows it, and you can't ever say it, you can't ever write it. It's one of those things that you have to keep secret. So that's something that is very particular to this strain of Buddhism. Shingon Buddhism doesn't necessarily do that every time, as far as I know, but again, how would I know? It's a secret, so keep that in mind. But yeah, it's kept blank for that.
Okay, so that's a blank for the teacher to insert the name. Okay. Did not at all come across as I was reading it. So another term that this translation leaves untranslated that comes up a lot is Vidyadhara. A quick search gives me an impression that you might call that a demigod?
That's right, yeah. In the past, we've talked about Rakshas and Yakshas, and they're even mentioned in this sutra as well. These are these semi-divine beings, these land spirits, or these earth spirits, that are guardians of the Dharma, and they are sort of taken over from Hinduism and from the Hindu pantheon, and they attend to Hindu gods, usually. And so a Vidyadhara is also this sort of demigod. It's sort of like a category that sort of applies to several different types or manifestations of beings, but they're basically the same sort of thing as a Yaksha, or as a Raksha, or as a Gandharva, or something like that. Their name, Vidyadhara, translates totally to wisdom holders, or possessors of wisdom, or something like that. And they are these members of the Indian religious pantheon, or the Hindu religious pantheon or cosmology, and they're these spirits that possess these magical powers and these abilities to affect sort of what happens to the Dharma, what happens to the teaching whenever it's transmitted and stuff like that. They're usually involved in protecting the mind-to-mind transmission sort of transaction that goes on between the teacher and the student, so that the information doesn't get out, so that it doesn't get clogged, so that it doesn't get changed, so that it doesn't get accidentally revealed, so on and so forth. So they're sort of these witnesses, these supporting characters to the transmission of the Dharma.
Okay. So we're given a list of siddhi, material objectives, supernatural powers, siddhi of the Vidyadhara, and knowledge of all the Tathagatas. So at least the first two there sound like obvious traps.
I don't know if there is a prescription as to which of these the practitioner must respond with. And the reason why I kind of, as a blanket statement here, will say I don't know, is because in order for the practitioner who's being initiated to know what their options are, they would have sort of already had to be initiated. And so I guess what I'm saying is they don't know the secret. They don't know what's going to be asked of them during their initiation, most likely. So which one would they say? I don't know. I can't really... That's something I can't make sense of either. I don't think that the material objectives or the supernatural powers are put in there as traps necessarily. That just is not something that Buddhist sutras often do, if they do it ever. And it's also not something that falls outside of the purview of an initiate into the tradition. Technically, these things still are things that you can get and do and have whenever you're initiated into the tradition and whenever you do the practices and whenever you advance to that level. This isn't something that we've just seen in esoteric Buddhism. It's something that we've seen with every bodhisattva in the Mahayana texts so far, and the Buddha in all texts. They have supernatural powers, and whatever material objectives they have, they come to light, they realize in some way or somehow. So this is not something that's outside of the realm of possible, according to the Buddhist system. It's outside of the realm of possible for us. This isn't something that we can realize. This isn't something that we can do. And so it might seem like a trap because it might seem like it's something that selfishly motivates a person to get initiated. They want to sort of turn into like someone with an infinite money glitch where they can just supernaturally copy all the money they have, or somebody who just wants to fly around and read minds, that sort of thing. And my instinct is to say that if somebody had those selfish objectives in mind, they wouldn't get to this ritual. They wouldn't get to the stage where this initiation would be happening. So I don't think that they're traps, but I also just can't speak to how that interaction, that ritualized interaction of which of these do you want at the end of this text, I don't know how that's supposed to go and how it does go in reality, because it's a secret.
Fair enough. That's me being writer brain, I think. Anytime there's some test of character and one of the options is material benefit, that is usually a immediate failure of the test of character. So that's the mode I was thinking in here.
It's not a bad mode at all, but it's something we should keep in mind too, that oftentimes in history, there are cases where people will initiate, and then after they have initiated and advanced to a certain level, they'll leave and they'll do other stuff. And that's something that's sort of happened since Buddhism was founded, essentially, is that people will get to a certain level of initiation and they'll go off and they'll go back into the world and they'll just, get a job and live their lives and have families and do whatever. Or they'll travel around being a teacher, a self-proclaimed teacher. Or they'll go around and participate in public works and building bridges and irrigation systems and stuff like that. Or they will go around and perform miracles. They'll be healers and they'll chant good fortune and chant for good harvest and chant for healthy births, and they'll chant for fertility and they'll chant for all kinds of stuff like that and then move on. There's lots of precedent for people who will get to a certain level, theoretically past the level of this initiation ritual, and then they'll go and do whatever. And so in those cases, I think that there's a pretty even split of good actors and bad actors. There's good actors who are initiated and they go out and do mostly pretty good things, right? They spread the Dharma and they're nice to people and they do public works and they are spiritual refuge for the community in some way. And the other half are bad actors who go around and say, I can fly, I can read minds, I can heal you, I can make you have good harvest, I can read your dreams, I can tell your fortune, and give me money for it, right? And the ritual is not supposed to filter those people out, necessarily, by itself.
That's one where I think I would have to be initiated to know more, and I definitely don't have the faith or drive to make that happen, so I'm probably just going to have to live with I don't know on that one.
Right.
So, last thing I wanted to talk about, just a phrase that was in the sutra that I didn't understand. At one point, the powers include destroying the 100 families in a moment. It seemed like the implication there that was like psychic rock-breaking abilities, but that phrase doesn't follow in a way that makes any kind of sense. The motion being described here is almost like the motions that I would see in like a Dungeons and Dragons spellcaster. It's talking about specific ways of moving the hands and fingers to basically move stones.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you sort of zoom in on the motion aspect of it. So it says the families, the 100 families, and that doesn't mean like families of people or of Buddhas or Bodhisattvas. That's actually families of different sort of mental defilements, or you might say families of different mental obstacles or delusions or ignorances. These mental states, which are counterintuitive to reaching enlightenment, these are the things that can be destroyed with these motions. And these motions are mudras. These mudras are for sort of killing off all of these defilements and these ignorances and these obstacles to your practice and to your mindfulness and to your understanding for all practitioners around you and for yourself. So these are actually physical hand motions or body poses, hand poses, which are used for clearing yourself and everyone around you of all that stuff. And that's why mudras are often sort of thought of, or even, you might even say co-opted, for having some sort of like supernatural or magic power. For example, if anybody has seen Naruto, all of the crazy hand motions that go into the magic system of Naruto, those are all roughly based on mudras and roughly based on the practice of a mudra, because it's sort of a hand pose or a hand movement combined with some chanting that has this magical power to protect, to get rid of ignorance and defilement, or anything like that.
And we see spellcasting systems doing similar things in the West as well. This is not the first time this idea has come up.
Exactly right. And the idea is interesting about mudra as well is that all of us have done mudras accidentally without knowing it. We've done that motion in some way without actually knowing it. And whenever we've done it, it hasn't had that special secret power. Mudras and the body poses themselves, the movements of our bodies having any power, our words having any power, our minds having any special powers, these sort of things are not understood to happen for us until we become initiated, until we go through this ritual, until we're introduced into the mandala as one of these deities. And so it's fascinating just because you're left asking, if you know this information, if you're familiar with this tradition, you're left asking what actually causes the difference? What makes these same hand motions be any different? Is it you believing that it's different, or is something different and that's why you believe it's different? And so it's interesting. I think that the answer more than likely is going to be religious. It's going to be, it's different because you believe it's different because you have the enlightened eye and you believe that the enlightened eye exists and that it sees everything as it is. But I think that it's something that's kind of left open, because it's possible to have these supernatural powers and have these abilities without being an initiated monk or without being a Shingon person, an esoteric person. You can still be a bodhisattva, still be very powerful and spiritually advanced and have these abilities without knowing about the Buddha's Dharma. We've talked about that before, the idea that every sentient being in the whole cosmology is understood to be on the path, even if they have little or no or an uncertain relationship to the Buddha and his Dharma. So it's fascinating stuff.
So that was what I wanted to talk about. Been at it for a bit, so hopefully I got most of it. Is there anything I missed that you'd like to talk about?
No, I think that takes care of everything I had as well.
All right. In that case, let's call this one done. So that was part 1 of Fascicle 3 of the Vajrasekhara Sutra, and a long discussion on the ethics of reading it as well. But it was a good discussion, so glad we had it. Next time, we're going to go over part 2 of Fascicle 3.
And that will conclude our reading of the Vajrasekhara Sutra.
Oh, nice. I didn't realize that was it. Cool. All right. Well, looking forward to the conclusion then.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. Many thanks to our patron, Tanner. If you would like to join him, please take a look at patreon.com/brightonbuddhism. We thank you for your support.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and voice of Hearer.
And I'm Dox, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this is meant Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have a question you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment or review, subscribing, or joining us on social media. Email us at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com or find us on Mastodon at brightbuddhism@mstdn.party. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.